I was fired from my job because I told my boss that I slept with a woman and that she was his mother. I always thought my biggest fear was losing my job unexpectedly, but I could have never imagined it would happen in such a ridiculous and catastrophic way. It all started, as usual, with a hangover. I woke up in my apartment, my head pounding like a jackhammer, my mouth dry as sandpaper. The bitter taste of last night's whiskey still lingered on my tongue, and as I blinked against the harsh morning light, I tried to piece together what had happened. The vague memory of a bar, loud laughter, and the scent of expensive perfume drifted through my mind, but the details were murky at best. I groaned, rolling over in bed, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. A soft, contented sigh came from the other side of the mattress. My stomach clenched. Slowly, I turned my head, and there she was, a woman, lying on her side, her dark hair fanned across my pillow. She was older than the women I usually went for, but she had a kind of elegance, a confidence that made her undeniably attractive. Even in my haze, I could tell she was someone used to getting what she wanted. I swallowed hard. Who the hell was she? The answer came faster than I expected. "Morning, darling," she murmured, stretching lazily as she blinked at me with a satisfied smirk. Her voice was smooth, refined. Shit. I sat up too quickly, and my head punished me for it. My mind raced through the events of last night. Drinking, flirting, a hotel room. Had we? Yeah, we had. Good morning," I said awkwardly, rubbing my temple. She chuckled, reaching over to run a finger down my arm. "You were quite the gentleman last night." I forced a weak smile, still trying to remember if I had at least asked for her name. Before I could say anything else, she rolled out of bed, moving gracefully toward the bathroom. "I'll call you a cab, sweetheart," she said, disappearing behind the door. I sat there in stunned silence, the events of the previous night slowly coming back in fragments. I still didn't have a name, but I knew one thing: I had just slept with a woman way out of my league. By the time I left the hotel, I was still in a daze. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my coworker Jake. "Dude, are you alive? You were saying some crazy shit last night." I frowned, my stomach twisting. What crazy shit? Before I could reply, another message popped up. "Also, you might want to lay low. You said some stuff about the boss and, his mother." My blood ran cold. Number, no way. I wouldn't have. The memories hit me like a freight train. Me, laughing too loudly at the bar. Jake, egging me on. And Thino. Fuck, I remembered saying it. Boasting, like an absolute idiot, about the woman I had just spent the night with. The same woman who, now that I thought about it, looked an awful lot like, oh no. Panic gripped my chest. I had slept with my boss's mother, and I had told people about it. My phone rang. It was my boss. I didn't even have time to think. My fingers hovered over the screen. Do I answer? Do I run? Too late. The call went to voicemail, and a single text came through. "Get your ass to my office. Now." I was so screwed. The cab ride to work felt like a funeral procession. Every second that passed tightened the noose around my neck. My palms were sweaty, my stomach twisted into knots, and my mind was running 100 miles per hour, desperately trying to come up with an excuse, an explanation, hell, even a half-decent lie that might get me out of this mess. But I knew the truth. I was fucked. The elevator ride up to the office was even worse. Every time the doors slid open, I expected to see security waiting for me, ready to drag my sorry ass outside. But no, that would have been too easy. My boss, no. His mother's son wanted to handle this personally. As I stepped out onto our floor, I noticed the eerie silence. People were staring, whispering, nudging each other. Great. So everyone knew. Fantastic. Jake was the first to approach me. His face was a mix of amusement and horror. "Dude," he whispered, "you actually came in? I would have fled the country." "Yeah, well, I wasn't thinking that far ahead." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Man, he is pissed. Like, I've never seen him this mad. And you told people? Jesus." "I was drunk, okay?" I hissed under my breath. "It's not like I planned this." "Yeah, well, planning or not, you slept with the boss's mother, and now he wants your head on a stick." Before I could respond, a voice boomed from the far end of the office. "Get in here. Now." Silence. A collective wince ran through the office as everyone turned to stare at me. My boss, Mark Jennings, stood in the doorway of his office, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. His eyes were full of murder. I swallowed hard and forced my feet to move. As I stepped into his office, the door slammed shut behind me. The tension in the room was suffocating. "Sit." I sat. Mark leaned against his desk, arms crossed, eyes boring into me. For a moment, he just stared. The silence stretched so long I thought I might pass out from stress alone. Then he spoke. "Tell me it's not true." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. "Tell me," he said again, slower this time, "that you did not just brag to half the office about fucking my mother." Hearing him say it out loud made me want to throw myself out the window. Look, Mark, I didn't know." "Oh, you didn't know?" He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You just happened to sleep with a woman twice your age and then accidentally told the entire office about it?" I winced. "I was drunk." "I don't care." His voice was deadly calm, which was somehow worse than yelling. "Do you have any idea what kind of shitstorm you've just unleashed?" I shook my head because, honestly, I didn't. "My mother," he said, voice dripping with venom, "is a widow, a well-respected woman. And now, thanks to you, she's the office punchline. People are laughing behind my back." Behind her back. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? Mark ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Then he fixed his glare on me. "You know what happens next, right?" I nodded numbly. "You're fired. Effective immediately." I had expected it, but hearing the words still sent a wave of panic through me. "Mark, please." "Number." He pointed a finger at me. "Pack your shit and get the hell out of my building, and pray to God that I don't make this worse for you." I had no idea what that meant, but I wasn't about to ask. Instead, I stood up slowly, my body numb. The weight of what I had just lost hit me like a freight train. My job, my reputation, everything. As I reached for the door, Mark spoke one last time. "Oh, and one more thing?" I turned back. "If you ever come near my mother again," he said, his voice deathly quiet, "I will ruin you." I didn't respond. I just nodded and walked out. The second I stepped back into the office, all eyes were on me. Some were wide with shock, others smirking, a few pretending to work like they hadn't been eavesdropping the entire time. Jake approached cautiously. "So, how'd it go?" I shot him a look. "Yeah, okay, dumb question." I grabbed my things and walked out without another word. As I stepped onto the street, the cold air hitting my face, I realized one thing. I had just hit rock bottom. Or at least, I thought I had. I had no idea things were about to get so much worse. I stood outside my office building, clutching a cardboard box filled with the sad remnants of my career, a few pens, a coffee mug, a couple of files I probably didn't need anymore. It was over, just like that. I had lost my job in the most humiliating way possible, and the worst part, it hadn't even been a great job to begin with. Just a steady paycheck, a desk, and the illusion of a stable future. Now, I didn't even have that. I took a deep breath, trying to collect myself. "Okay, just breathe. You'll figure this out." Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A new message. "Unknown number. Call me. Now." My stomach twisted. I had a feeling I knew who it was, but I wasn't sure I wanted to confirm it. Before I could decide, another message popped up. "Unknown number. Don't make me come find you, sweetheart." Yup, it was her. I hesitated for a few seconds before finally calling the number. The phone barely rang once before she picked up. "Well, that was fast," she purred. I swallowed hard. "Listen, Oh, hush, darling. I'm not mad." "You're not?" She laughed a low, amused sound that somehow made me even more nervous. "Please, I knew exactly what I was doing that night, and I have to say, you were delightful company." I ran a hand down my face. "Jesus. What's wrong? Are you upset because my dear son fired you?" I let out a humorless laugh. "You knew he was my boss?" "Of course I knew," she said, sounding almost offended. "What kind of woman do you take me for?" I stared at the ground, trying to process this. "So, What now? Well, she said, her tone playful, that depends. How badly do you want revenge? I blinked. Excuse me? Oh, sweetheart. I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. You didn't think I was just going to let my son push you around, did you? I mean, he's your son. And you, she said smoothly, are far more interesting than he is. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew one thing for sure. I was in way over my head. Meet me for dinner, she continued, as if this was a normal conversation. I have an offer for you. I hesitated. Every logical part of my brain screamed run, but I was unemployed, humiliated, and, let's be honest, curious. What kind of offer? Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Come find out. Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. I should have walked away. I should have ignored her, gone home, and started applying for new jobs like a responsible adult. Instead, I found myself standing outside a high-end restaurant an hour later, my reflection staring back at me through the polished glass. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. This was either the smartest decision of my life, or the absolute dumbest. The restaurant was the kind of place where people didn't check the prices on the menu because, if you had to, you didn't belong there. Soft jazz played in the background, and the air smelled like expensive wine and even more expensive regret. A waiter, dressed better than I was, guided me toward a private booth in the back. And there she was, Mark's mother, Vivian Jennings. She looked effortlessly elegant, swirling a glass of red wine between her fingers as she gave me that same knowing smirk. The kind of smirk that made it clear she was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. I slid into the seat across from her, feeling like a condemned man at his last meal. Ah, there you are, she said smoothly, taking a slow sip of wine. I was starting to think you'd lost your nerve. I forced a smile. No offense, but I still have no idea what I'm doing here. Vivian chuckled, setting her glass down. Oh, sweetheart, you may not know what you're doing, but that's what makes you so much fun to play with. I swallowed hard. Yeah, this was a bad idea. Before I could respond, the waiter returned, pouring me a drink without even asking. Guess they just knew the kind of night I was having. So, I said finally, gripping my glass. What's this offer you mentioned? Vivian tilted her head, watching me like a cat watching a very stupid mouse. I assume Mark made quite the spectacle of firing you today. You could say that. She sighed dramatically. That boy always had such a temper. I want to take business so personally. I raised an eyebrow. You're saying you disapprove of what he did? She gave me a slow, indulgent smile. Let's just say that my interests don't always align with my son's. I frowned. What does that mean? Vivian leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming. It means that Mark runs his little company like a king lording over his kingdom, and while that may be amusing to watch, it's also terribly inefficient. I blinked. Are you saying you want to take him down? She chuckled softly. Not down, darling. Just rearrange the hierarchy. I let out a slow breath. And where do I come in? She smiled, as if I had just asked the exact right question. You know the company, she said. You know its weaknesses, and more importantly, you have nothing to lose. I stared at her. You want me to help you screw over your own son? Vivian sighed, as if she was tired of explaining something obvious. I want you to help correct a mistake. I exhaled sharply. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. I had just slept with this woman a couple of nights ago, gotten fired because of it, and now she wanted me to help her sabotage her own son. Why should I trust you? I asked. Vivian's smirk widened. Who said you should? I just assumed you'd want revenge. I hesitated. Because, yeah, I was furious at Mark. He had humiliated me, fired me like I was nothing. And sure, I had technically brought it on myself, but still it stung. Fine, I said carefully. Let's say I'm interested. What exactly are you offering me? Vivian reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black envelope. She slid it across the table. I picked it up, flipped it open, then nearly choked on my drink. It was a check. A very large check. Enough money to keep me afloat for months, maybe even a year. I looked back up at her. You're serious? She arched a brow. I don't play games, sweetheart. That was a lie. She definitely played games. But she also played to win. I stared at the check, my mind racing. This was dangerous, messy, but also, I glanced back up at Vivian. She was watching me expectantly, waiting for my decision. And against all logic, I realized I already knew my answer. All right, I said, slipping the check into my pocket. I'm in. Vivian smiled, lifting her glass in a silent toast. I had no idea what I had just signed up for, but there was no turning back now. I left the restaurant that night with a check in my pocket, a pit in my stomach, and the growing realization that I had just made a deal with the devil. Or maybe something worse, bored devil, one who enjoyed playing with her food before devouring it. I should have walked away. I should have torn up the check, gotten on LinkedIn, and started begging for a new job like a normal, responsible adult. But instead, I found myself pacing my apartment, reading over the details Vivian had given me. It wasn't just a simple takedown. It was a game, and she expected me to play my part. 1 week later. If there was one thing I had underestimated, it was how easy it was to make Mark Jennings look like an idiot. The man was already a walking PR disaster, held together by arrogance and nepotism. Vivian had given me a simple task: expose his weaknesses. So I did. It started small anonymous leaks about his reckless spending, whispers about his questionable leadership decisions, subtle hints that he was in way over his head. I fed just enough to the right people, the ones who already hated him, the ones who were just waiting for an excuse to turn. And then I hit him where it really hurt. Mark had a thing for side projects. Expensive, half-baked ideas that never went anywhere but cost the company a fortune. I made sure the board knew just how much money had vanished under his watch. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Board members started asking questions. Investors started getting nervous. And Mark started losing his shit. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a bar when my phone rang. I knew who it was before I even looked. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? Silence. Then Mark's voice. Low and furious. I know it was you. I took a slow sip of my drink. I have no idea what you're talking about. Bullshit. He exhaled sharply. I should have destroyed you the second I fired you, but no, you had to go and make this personal. I smirked. You mean like how you publicly humiliated me for something that was none of your damn business? Mark let out a sharp, bitter laugh. So this is revenge, huh? You think you can take me down? I leaned back in my chair. I don't have to take you down, Mark. You're doing that all by yourself. Silence. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard him use, you have no idea what you've just done. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a moment, then slipped it back into my pocket. He was scared, and that meant I was winning. 3 weeks later, Mark Jennings was officially being pushed out of his own company. I hadn't expected it to happen this fast. But once the board smelled weakness, they pounced. His credibility was in free fall. The media was circling like vultures. And Vivian, she was thrilled. We met again. This time in her penthouse, because, of course, she had a penthouse. She poured us both drinks, her smile sharper than ever. I have to say, she murmured, clinking her glass against mine, you exceeded my expectations. I took a slow sip. So what happens now? Vivian chuckled. Now, Mark gets the message. He steps aside quietly and I make sure you're taken care of. That should have sounded reassuring. Instead, something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I have to admit, she continued, tilting her head, I didn't expect you to be so ruthless. I forced a smile. I guess you bring out the best in me. She smirked. Oh, darling, you have no idea what I'm capable of bringing out. I ignored the way my stomach twisted. The job was done. I had my revenge. I had won. So why did it feel like I had just sold my soul? 1 month later, Mark disappeared. I don't mean he went into hiding. I mean he vanished. No social media. No press statements. No desperate attempts to claw his way back. Just gone. And that's when I started to get worried. Because for all his arrogance, Mark wasn't the kind of guy who just gave up. Something had happened. And Vivian, she was more powerful than ever. I didn't know what game I had just played. But I was starting to think I had been a pawn all along. And if Mark hadn't survived the game, I wasn't sure I would either. In general, write your opinion. about this story. You can also share yours in the comments. It will be interesting to read. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Your support is very important to me. Take care of yourself.